So this is not a subject that lends itself to a lot of sort of shtick. The prerequisite for any Jewish speech, the funny stories that precede and frame the discussion. So allow me to take the plunge. And in doing so, let me begin by saying the following. I think I fully understand that there is no unanimity of views on this subject. First of all, we're Jews. So what's new? Why should this be any different than any other subject? I mean, on a lesser note, we can't even agree whether we should or should not eat rice during Pesach. My wife, in her tradition, Candy, it's your tradition, insists that rice is permissible. There are other Jews in the world who would rather die than allow rice into their diet during the days of Pesach. So we can't agree on rice. We can't even agree on how to spell Hanukkah. I mean, since we're now ending summer and beginning the fall and we begin to think about the holiday season, pay attention this year. Not only can we not agree, but people are ready to fall on the sword for their own particular spelling of Hanukkah. C-H-A-H-A-N, bum. So that we don't agree entirely on the Iran deal should be headline news? Give me a break. So I fully understand and entirely respect the fact that there is not a unanimity of views on the subject of Iran. Fine. Point number two. That said, and yes, though the stakes are enormously high, it is incumbent on everyone who participates in the debate, we believe, and we have tried to model at AJC, civility and mutual respect. I don't think there is anyone in the debate that I've met, on whatever side along the continuum, who wants to see Iran with nuclear weapons, certainly with this regime. And I don't believe that there is anyone who wants to believe that we are back in the 1930s and those who support the deal are nothing more than clones of Chamberlain and are happy to throw in the towel in order to give Iran everything it wants. That kind of conversation may at times feel good for some, but I think we should leave it for conversations with the mirror. In the real world of serious public policy discussion and debate, it seems to me that we need to understand that there is no certainty about any public policy issue, including this one. No one, by definition, has all the truth on their side. No one with perfect 2020 foresight can tell us what's going to happen in Iran and with the deal 3 months from now, 3 years from now, or 10 years from now. So I think that on the sort of humility index, the intellectual humility index, I think everyone needs to come down a notch or two. And on the civility index, go up a notch or two, irrespective of what the conclusion may be. Point number three. At the end of the day, though, this is a binary decision. For those, and by the way, AJC is a great example, for those who try to find the middle space, who by instinct tend to be those who look for the common ground when there are such deep divisions, at the end of the day on this issue, as of now at least, there is no middle space, except in the sort of fanciful minds of some who would wish for the middle space. But in the reality of the policy world, there is no middle space today. Hence, this is a binary decision. And those who want to sort of try and market their triangulation, their third way, are likely to fail. Members of Congress, including our own senators and congressmen from New York State and Connecticut, are going to be asked in the coming weeks to make a binary decision, yay or nay. There is no third path. And therefore, at AJC, when we confronted this issue beginning on July the 14th, we understood that this was a binary decision. And so we had to overcome the instinct of many within the organization who wanted desperately to try and bridge the inevitable differences and polarities which would emerge. Impossible. But AJC decided that we had to take the plunge in exploring the issue, and doing so, if you will, with a clean slate. That meant that we would depoliticize and depersonalize the issues. And if I may, I would urge others to do the same. Easier said than done. What does depoliticize mean? In our case, we are a nonpartisan organization, both by law and by instinct. This is not a referendum for us on the Democratic Party or the leadership of the President of the United States. Because for many, that's what it seems to be. You like him, you like the party, ergo, you support. You don't like him, you don't like the party, ergo, you oppose. That is too simple, indeed, too simplistic. We wanted to depoliticize, and we wanted to depersonalize in the same spirit. And so we took a 360-degree view of the subject of the Iran deal, beginning on July the 14th. But in reality, it began 20 years ago, almost to the day. AJC began when others were silent, when others were indifferent, when others, I dare say, were asleep in many cases, to understand the emerging threat of this Iranian regime and the marriage of this regime with weapons of mass destruction, including the prospect of nuclear weapons. And I could write a book, time permitting, on the journey over the last 20 years. We have traveled to every major capital in the world on multiple occasions and met with just about every world leader you can name, from Tokyo to Seoul, from Beijing to New Delhi, from Moscow to Berlin, from Brussels to Paris, from Rome to London, from Canberra to Brasilia, from Washington to the United Nations and back and forth. And I'm missing a number of countries in the mix. We spent 20 years trying to understand the Iranian nuclear issue. And I would add, trying to catch up on the physics that too many of us didn't do as well in high school as we would have wished, in retrospect. So I have to say that I found it particularly ironic after AJC took a position that one person wrote to us and questioned our competence, quote, competence to speak on the subject. Well, the irony was that about 2 weeks after we received this letter from this individual, this person's name was one of the 26 who shared the title former in an ad that appeared in the New York Times in support of the deal. In other words, because we chose to oppose the deal, by definition, we did not have competence. But those who supported the deal, whatever their place or station in life might be, did have competence. Unfair, inappropriate, and I believe in violation of the spirit of civility and mutual respect which needs to govern this debate. And among the things we learned over the last 20 years that informed our process from July 14th until August the 5th, when we issued our statement, were, number one, we cannot trust the Iranian regime in anything it says. The pattern of deceit and deception of this Iranian regime is so obvious, so clear, so inbred, that to take their word at face value or to allow wishful thinking to replace sober, hard-nosed analysis can be extraordinarily dangerous. Number two, with great respect for this and every government of the United States, we also cannot outsource our complete and total trust in the ability of governments to understand major nuclear developments. I know that sounds like a bit of chutzpah, but I would remind us, because it's necessary for this discussion, for those who are ready to outsource based on politics or person. Just to take the last three administrations, during the Clinton administration, among the unfortunate developments was the North Korea Accord. Go back and read what we were told by the President of the United States was the outcome of the North Korea nuclear agreement and the safety and security it would provide to Northeast Asia, particularly to the countries surrounding North Korea, who did participate in the process, and to the security of the United States. Looking back, I'm sure that President Clinton wished he had never said those words. He did many other things spectacularly well, but his administration got this one wrong. What else did they get wrong? Well, with the vast intelligence apparatus of the United States, on which we spend tens of billions of dollars, in fact, we don't even know the precise figure, we did not know that India was building and about to test a nuclear bomb. Nor did we know that Pakistan was about to build and test a nuclear bomb, thus ushering in an arms race between two longtime adversaries in South Asia that could have triggered a regional and potentially a global conflict. We missed those developments. With all the technical signal intelligence that we had, all the human intelligence that we had, all the people on the ground, we missed these developments. During the Bush administration, let's remember a couple of things. Number one, again, coming back to the pattern of deceit and destruction by Iran, Natanz and Fordo, both facilities that are well known today to anyone who follows the subject, were revealed by Iranian opposition sources to exist. Facts that we did not know in the United States. Major nuclear-related facilities being operated by this Iranian regime were unknown to us until they were revealed by others. Or how about the fact that after we invaded Iraq in 2003, and in referring to it, it's not an endorsement of the invasion, it's simply an analysis of what happened. The two most frightened countries on the face of the earth were neighboring Iran and Syria. We had pulverized Iraq in a matter of days and weeks, something that Iran could not achieve in 8 years of conflict with Iraq in the 1980s. And Iran pretty much froze its nuclear program in its tracks. But then it began to smell an American weakness. and it took advantage of that weakness, and I believe to this day continues to take advantage of that weakness across two administrations. And it began to probe and to push and to move again into the nuclear realm. And we look back nostalgically at 2003 and understand the opportunity that was lost. But as you know, these events are not rehearsals. They're the real thing. They come, they linger for a moment, and they go. You seize the moment, or you don't. And if you don't, you may rue it for the rest of your life, or not. What else happened in the Bush administration? Well, we missed something else. That agreement with North Korea that we had from 1994 had not stopped Korea from proliferating, including in its nuclear deal with Syria. And it was thanks to Israel, not the United States, that in 2007, that Syrian nuclear reactor was destroyed. Think back for a moment. Had the Syrians proceeded, had the Israelis not acted, what would the picture look like today with Assad in power? 200,000 plus people already dead, millions rendered refugees, and that's without nuclear weapons. But that brings us to the Obama administration. And let's stay with Syria for a moment. Last year, we were told, as an outgrowth of a very unfortunate moment in American diplomacy, I would argue, when we blinked on the red line that we had established with Syria in its use of chemical weapons. When you're the United States, when you're the world's leading global power, and you draw a red line in the sand, either you mean it or don't start down that road. But we issued that warning, and then we blinked. We blinked. But then Russia came to our rescue, and along came the plan to remove all chemical weapons from Syria. And it looked good, and we touted it. And indeed, much of Syria's chemical weapons arsenal was removed. But we had been told that it had all been removed. Until 1 year later, just recently, when not only did we see evidence of chlorine-laced bombs being used by the Syrian army against Syrian citizens. Parenthetically, one has to ask, if this is what Syria will do to its own citizens, what would it do if it could to neighboring Israel? But then we discover in an exhaustive investigation by the Wall Street Journal news section, that's the non-politicized section of the paper, that indeed intelligence agencies in the United States acknowledged that Syria did not give up all its chemical weapons. They still have them, they're still doing research, and as we've seen, they've still been using them. So my point, every administration we hope and pray will succeed. And in many ways, every administration has some important, very important achievements to its credit. But to simply outsource trust on an issue of American, regional, and global security based on trust, we at AJC believed was not the way to go. And so, John Kerry came to AJC. He spent 90 minutes with us in the days after July 14th in an off-the-record conversation. Wendy Sherman, who led the U.S. negotiations over the last couple of years, came separately to us and also graciously spent 90 minutes off the record. We spoke with other experts who opposed the deal, those who were in between. We spoke with friends in the Arab world, we spoke with friends in Israel, and we spoke with friends in Europe. As I said earlier, we tried to do a 360-degree view of the issue. And after that 22-day examination, against the backdrop of 20 years of looking at this issue, trying to understand it, blowing the whistle when and where we could, we concluded overwhelmingly in our leadership that we had to oppose the deal. There was no third way. It was a binary decision, as I said. It was not an easy decision. We understood there are consequences of taking a position. The consequence of taking the yes position in favor of the deal is that one has to count on the fact that the deal will work. It will deliver on its promises. If one opposes the deal as we did, then we understand that we're leading people in a different direction, where there is a question mark and a degree of uncertainty. The inevitable question back to those who oppose the deal is, depending on how Yiddish-inflected your language is, nu? So you oppose the deal, very nice. So what do you offer in its place? And it's a very legitimate question. And we always want to have some degree of certainty. We want to know what it is we're buying. And I cannot, in good conscience, tell this audience here at Emanu-El that we can, with 100% prophetic ability, say what will happen in the absence of this deal. We have our beliefs, we have our assumptions, as do others who oppose the deal, including members of Congress, people like Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Nita Lowey, and others. But if you put us up against the wall and say, can you give me 100% certainty that you'll get a better deal, that you can avoid conflict, I'd have to say I can't. I can't. Wish I could, but I'd be dishonest. On the other hand, because there is another hand, there is a certainty to the deal. And it's not an opponent of the deal who said it. It is the principal proponent of the deal who said it, the President of the United States. Maybe it was a comment that he subsequently regretted, but he said in an interview on NPR that within 13, 14, or 15 years, Iran will have no breakout time to a nuclear weapon. That's the President of the United States speaking about the consequence of this deal. So you have to weigh the certainty of what the deal will permit down the road with a measure of uncertainty that I will acknowledge about what happens if the deal in the end is turned down. I'll go further. We know a few other things about certainties. We know, for example, that with the deal, this regime, and let's remember what regime it is we're talking about. This regime of Iran, this revolutionary Islamic Shiite regime, with an apocalyptic view of the world that even after the deal continues to call for death to America, and even after the deal calls for the annihilation of the State of Israel, that this regime will receive somewhere between $56 and $150 billion in cold cash within the next 12 months or so. That's a fact. That's a fact. That is the unfrozen assets that Western banks have held until now because Iran has not been in compliance with Security Council resolutions and the International Atomic Energy Agency strictures and guidelines. That money will be handed over to that regime, and fact, there are no restrictions, even if they could be imposed, on how that money is spent. The assumption of our government, based on our best intelligence estimates, is that the bulk of the money will go for domestic purposes in Iran that have been slowed down and held up by the sanctions. Well, we all hope so. Better it goes for schools, sewers, and highways than for Hamas, Hezbollah, and destabilization in the region. No guarantee. No guarantee. But a guarantee the money is going. What else is certain? As the sanctions are lifted, that money is only the beginning of the flow. Today we learned, to our great disappointment, that the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, arguably among the world's most respected leaders today, is planning to go to Tehran in October. Now, that follows the visits of the British Foreign Secretary, the French Foreign Minister, the German Vice Chancellor, and forgive me, because these are all in many ways friendly nations with whom we have strong ties. No one wants to be the last one into Tehran. The opportunity to reopen embassies that still have "Death to Britain" written on them, and especially the opportunity for business deals, means that no one wants to be the last one in. The Italians, the Germans, the French, the British, they've all lined up, and they're competing with the Indians, the South Koreans, the Japanese, and of course the Chinese and the Russians. More money will flow. That's a certainty. What else is a certainty? Within 5 years, according to this deal, and I didn't say in 5 years, within 5 years, meaning it could be less, all restrictions on the sale of military weapons to Iran will be lifted by the United Nations. Now again, I remind us of the nature of this regime. And I remind us that we're being told this is a transactional deal on the nuclear issue only, walling off every other issue. But we're giving this regime, the regime that tried to kill the Saudi ambassador at a popular restaurant in Georgetown, the regime that is wanted by Interpol for its central involvement in the killing of 85 people at the AMIA building in Buenos Aires in 1994, and 2 years earlier, 29 people at the Israeli embassy there. The regime that is destabilizing Yemen, leading it to war with our ally Saudi Arabia, that regime, within 5 years, with certainty, will have the ban on military weapon sales lifted. Certainty. Within 8 years. Not again in. Within, maybe less. The ban on ballistic missile technology, which the UN imposed on Iran, will be lifted. Not because Iran changes its behavior, simply because Iran signed the deal and fulfilled the initial compliance issues to the satisfaction of the IAEA. Within 8 years, they will have ballistic missile technology. And I ask us, to what end? If Iran continues to peddle this farcical language that its nuclear program was entirely for peaceful purposes only, why do they need a ballistic missile technology program? Why do they need ICBMs? By the way, cold comfort. They already have missiles that can reach Israel. ICBMs, I remind us, begin with the letter I, which stands for intercontinental. Intercontinental. Who are those missiles for? And by the way, as many ask, if Iran's nuclear program is entirely for peaceful purposes, as they've tried to tell us, why do they need it in the first place? A country that is awash in oil and gas for decades to come, does it need a nuclear program? Especially one that includes hidden elements in Natanz and Fordo? Or how about the installation in Parchin, where we're now told, again, with certainty, again, let's remember this balance of certainty, uncertainty. Parchin, where Iran has done its research on the weaponization of nuclear elements, what are we now told? Associated Press. Associated Press, not a right-wing news source. AP saw a draft document, and what did it say? Essentially that Iran would inspect itself. It would take the soil samples, it would provide the imagery, it would agree on what inspectors could and could not come, and by the way, Americans will not be allowed. Americans will not be allowed as part of the inspection force. So let's keep that in mind. Those are things we know with certainty. And, again, I stress in wrapping this up, we know with certainty that this is a deal that doesn't dismantle. In the beginning of this administration, the approach, we were told, was quite straightforward, and we have it all on paper, on tape, on the record. Dismantle for dismantle. That was the American approach to these negotiations. We will dismantle our sanctions structure when Iran dismantles its nuclear infrastructure. What happened to dismantle for dismantle? It gave way to dismantle sanctions for delaying their nuclear program. There is almost nothing in the Iranian nuclear program that is being dismantled. It's in layman's terms being mothballed, being stored, being unplugged. It's not being dismantled. We were told by the administration that inspections would have to be anywhere, anytime. You heard that. It came from Ben Rhodes. It came from Ernest Moniz, the Secretary of Energy. Now we're being told, no, we never said it, but they did say it. And it's on the record. And it's been recorded. Now instead we're being told it's 24 days. But then we're being told, well, don't worry. In the world of nuclear physics, you can't do much to hide in 24 days. But other experts are saying not necessarily true. And not everything is only about fissile material. What about weaponization programs? What about research programs and advanced centrifuges? There's a lot more to this program. Then we were told by the Secretary of State that unless Iran comes clean on its past military dimensions of its program, there will be no deal. I'm paraphrasing. Now we're told, it's not really that important because in reality we know the things we're supposed to know anyway, so even if Iran doesn't fully disclose, we're okay. Hakol beseder. Everything's okay. In other words, I'm sorry to say, and I say this with a pained heart, because I say this as a true nonpartisan who wants the United States to succeed, who wants preeminence of American global leadership. We came into this deal with a very strong hand to play. A very strong hand to play. Iran came into this deal with a very weak hand to play, which only got weaker as oil prices plummeted. And all of their budgetary assumptions went down the tubes. And I have to tell you, if I were the dean at Wharton or Harvard Business School, I'm sorry to say it, but from now on, I'd be teaching Iranian negotiating tactics. I may not like them, I may not necessarily approve of them, but I have to tip my hat to them. They played a weak hand very smartly. And I dare say, and I know it's a bit of chutzpah, because those on the outside always find it easier to criticize than those on the inside. I understand that. But nonetheless, we had a strong hand to play. We had Iran on the ropes. We could have extracted more, I believe. And if this deal will not go through, I think it will not be too long before Iran, despite the bluff and the bluster, understands that it has to come back to the table. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, this is not the first or the second or the third international agreement which was found wanting by the United States Congress, by the way, or by presidents. President Ronald Reagan looked at Seoul II, and if you see study the history of Seoul II, he said we can do a lot better. And years later, we did a lot better with the Soviet Union. So as things stand, we've got a rogue regime, not a rogue regime, it's a regime that acts in a roguish, thuggish, destabilizing manner, which is about to achieve a cash windfall, a bonanza, and a legitimized path to breakout capacity. That's why AJC chose to oppose it. And with that, I welcome your questions and thank you for your attention.
Okay, David, question from the audience. If the deal is rejected by Congress, please describe your best view of, one, the events that will follow and how they will make Israel and the United States safer, and two, how much of the funds impounded by the sanctions will be subject to United States control?
So I want to be sure everyone knows the process, although I suspect you do at this point. By September 17th, the houses of Congress will vote, although I have to acknowledge that there is a chance, and the White House is certainly determined to increase the chance that the Senate will never get to vote, because they will not reach the 60 number in order to overcome a possible filibuster. And then, of course, if they reach that point and they do vote, then there is the promised presidential veto. And the president really has a very low bar to achieve here. We need to understand that. Because this is not a treaty, because the administration did not submit this as a treaty to the Hill, all the president has to do is achieve 1/3 plus 1 in at least one of the two houses of Congress, and he's achieved his goal. On the other hand, for those who oppose the deal, we have a much, much, much higher bar. It's, first of all, to win on the first vote, which is numerically guaranteed. There will be a bipartisan majority of at least 56 senators who will oppose the deal, and there will be a bipartisan majority in the House that will oppose the deal. That's known already. There's no surprise there. But when it comes to the presidential veto, there will be some Democrats who will stand with the president, of course, and they may be enough in one or both houses to prevent an override of the veto, so we may never get to the point of the question. Assuming we do, and again, I would say in all honesty that the odds are long right now, but assuming we get to that point, then I think it's going to come down very much to the question of American global leadership. If the President of the United States determines that though he is upset, disappointed, angry, that nonetheless America has to reassert its leadership and has to listen to the Congress, and by the way, let me add importantly, to the American people. Every single poll taken of the American people indicates that a majority of Americans oppose this deal. A lot of attention is being paid, I think, incorrectly to the Jewish community, as if the Jewish community were somehow the be-all and end-all of this discussion. CNN, Monmouth, Quinnipiac, and the other polls have all shown consistently that a majority of Americans oppose this deal. The president would have to say to our partners, we're a democracy. The American people have spoken. Their elected officials in Congress have spoken. And we expect to continue the solidarity. It's going to be a tough sell because the Europeans are already counting their deals. Very tough sell. The Europeans are facing economic issues, unemployment issues. They need exports. We know all that. But you know what? They listened to us once before. When we assembled this coalition, it would be up to American global leadership to see whether we can do it again. And I believe it will be incumbent on the administration with our full support to do so. And I'd make one other point about the day after any of the scenarios. Whatever happens, there is a day after this story, at least the immediate story. And we should not lose sight of the day after. And the day after, the United States and Israel need to be as close as they have been. The special relationship between our two countries needs to be as steadfast, and we need to be focusing as much on that as anything else. And by the way, I would add, as you know very well, which is why I didn't dwell on it, it's not just Israel. It's our Sunni allies, Egypt, Jordan, other countries that AJC visits regularly, that may be less public in their opposition, but in private are no less vehement in their opposition to this deal. They may have decided to engage in a Faustian bargain to see what weapons they can get. But we should be under no illusion. And by the way, last point, those weapons. It all comes down to this sad irony of the deal. The deal is supposed to make us all safer. That's one of the sort of elements that's being marketed. At the same time, we're about to embark on tens of billions of dollars in new weapons transfers and sales to the Gulf countries and perhaps to Israel in order to make them safer. How will the Middle East be safer in the long term with this new infusion of weapons in the most arms-laden region in the world? And with all the turbulence we've seen in the last several years of the inaptly named Arab Spring, at what point will more of these weapons fall into the wrong hands, and will American soldiers one day be faced with more American weapons being aimed at them? Richard.
David, an audience member has said, in terms of Iran's nuclear capability, it seems 100% certain that they would have a bomb within a few months without the deal. Sanctions wouldn't have stopped them when they were so close. So isn't this deal, admittedly flawed, better than 100% certainty that they would have a bomb without a deal?
Thank you for the question. I think there's a flaw in the premise, if I may. There is no 100% certainty that Iran would have the bomb. There is an assumption. But Iran knows and knew. You remember, for example, that cartoon that Prime Minister Netanyahu showed in his UN General Assembly speech, where he drew his red line. Iran understood very well that if it went too far in its program, that there would be real consequences. And if those consequences would not come from the United States, and I believe that Iran doubted not our capability. Capability is one of three elements in making these rough decisions. Besides capability, you need intelligence, actionable intelligence, and you need political will. Unless you have all three, you don't have the formula. And Iran knew that if it went too far, Israel had the capability, we believe, the intelligence, we believe, and the political will, we believe. So I'm not convinced that Iran, left to its own devices today without a deal, would have raced to the bomb, because there would have been consequences for that decision to race. Severe consequences.
David, an audience member has asked, has this issue permanently damaged United States-Israeli relations?
And here I want to be somewhat optimistic and say no. It has undoubtedly, at the risk of stating the obvious, it has certainly further damaged the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister. I think that's pretty abundantly clear. But that's one thing. It's another thing, by the way, the degree to which both leaders will allow their strong difference to affect the foundational relationship between our two countries, number one. And number two, leaders come and go. For some people, not quickly enough. For others, quite the opposite. But leaders come and go. The foundational values that define the U.S.-Israel relationship are enduring. And by the way, if President Obama were standing here before you today, he would say the same thing. If Prime Minister Netanyahu were standing here before you today, he would say the same thing. You may or may not choose to believe them entirely. You have the right to ask, but surely this affects something somewhere. But I think down deep, the United States understands that Israel is in a very different position. And I think we need to understand that. Number one, and again, too little is made of this. This is not the view only of the Israeli Prime Minister, who is not universally popular in the United States. This is the view of the political establishment of Israel, including the opposition leaders. And when you can get that kind of unanimity among Israeli political leaders, believe me, that's a rare day. I mean, they will not agree on the shape of the sanctuary, because that will be a kind of, it's a zero-sum political equation. If I give my opponent even an inch, he'll take a mile. So the fact that they all agree says something to many American leaders, whether they're willing to acknowledge it or not. The fact that Iran will not back away from its insistence on the elimination of the State of Israel does resonate with American leaders, including the President of the United States, and we've heard it from his lips. He understands that the people of the Shoah must take seriously any world leader who today calls for the elimination of the State of Israel. And thirdly, geography. I think American leaders, whatever their personal issues might be, they like, they don't like, that's human nature. The geography is different. Israel's 800 miles from the Iranian border. We are, 6,000, 7,000 miles away. We are the world's strongest military power, with forward assets all around Iran. Israel is the size of New Jersey. So I think that despite the personal issues, and I don't underestimate them, I think down deep, even the American leaders who are pushing strongly for this deal and at times annoyed and irritated by Israel's opposition, when they listen soberly, understand this is not about politics, this is not a dislike of the president, this is not a shift to the Republican Party. This is about Israeli leaders saying we cannot allow a second Holocaust. And as long as this Iranian regime speaks about our elimination, we have an obligation. And we cannot outsource our security to any other nation, including even our best, most essential friend, the United States.
David, many people have asked a very similar question, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it for all of their benefits. We're the only member of the P5+1 that seems to have any threat of opposing the deal. And as you pointed out, the foreign ministers and business people of these other nations are already rushing to Tehran to do business. Aren't we going to be standing alone at the end of the day if we reject the deal? And if we stand alone rejecting the deal, what effect will it realistically have?
Let me return to something I said earlier, but do it perhaps more dramatically. We're not just another nation. With great respect to Luxembourg. And by the way, great respect because I just saw an index where they are per capita the wealthiest nation in the world. So I don't say it lightly. The United States is not. We're not even second or third, by the way. It's a whole other story. We're not Luxembourg. The United States is the preeminent global military, diplomatic, political, and economic power in the world today. And by the way, after the events in China of the last few days, that point is only underscored. I don't gloat, not at all. I'm simply making an observation. So the power of American leadership should never be underestimated when it's mobilized. By the way, 2 members of Congress, one a Republican, one a Democrat, were in Paris recently and met with the French and asked this very question, Richard, there you are. I asked this very question of the French National Security Advisor, Jacques Audibert, a good friend of ours. And they reported that he said, we'll go back to the negotiating table if this deal is overturned. He subsequently denied saying it, but the two members of Congress stand by their report of exactly what he said. And by the way, it doesn't entirely surprise us, because if you follow these negotiations inning by inning by inning, the French, at most moments, have been the toughest. And if you speak to French leaders, as we do, privately, they're under no illusions that this deal will solve all the problems. So we begin with the fact that we may not be entirely alone. We continue with the fact that we are not just another nation. And at the end of the day, Richard, to be perfectly blunt, if that's the scenario we face, we turn to the other nations and we say very simply, you may or may not like this, but you have to choose. You choose between the American economy and the Iranian economy. You won't get to choose both. I don't think many of them are going to choose the Iranian economy. You know, none of us likes to hear that kind of language. We all want to live in an illusory world where things are done with great civility and genteelness. So you can put a velvet glove around the iron fist if you want, but it shouldn't mask the message. You choose, them or us. And I assure you the choice will be pretty clear.
David, what do you believe Israel What do you believe Israel will do if the deal is approved by the United States?
Well, Israel has tried to play its answer to that question very close to the vest, because it doesn't want to acknowledge, Richard, or the questioner, that the deal may end up going through. So I'm speculating, but the day after, if the deal goes through, Israel is pragmatic enough to understand that it will now have to begin a new round of discussions with the United States. And the President has indicated in a letter to Congressman Jerry Nadler that the United States is prepared to have that conversation and discussion about Israel's security needs going forward. So the discussion doesn't end. It just goes in another direction, befitting the unique relationship between the United States and Israel. If the subtext of the question is, would Israel engage in military action if it were unhappy with the outcome? And that's me asking a question that might or might not be on your mind, whoever asked the question. My guess, and it's been my guess even the last several years, has been that Israel would not and could not take military action if indeed the United States approves this deal with the support of Congress, and with the signature of the P5+1, and with the pre-approval of the UN Security Council unanimously. So Israel will keep its options on the table, but whether it can create a credible, convincing threat of force that Iran believes is serious is another question, at least in my mind.
What are the implications if Congress rejects the deal, President Obama vetoes, but Congress is not able to override it? Is half a loaf better than none?
Well, yes. Look, some people have said to us, look, David, the numbers are against you. Say the same thing to AIPAC. I know there are a number of members of AIPAC as well as AJC here this evening at Emanu-El. And some gleefully in the media have sort of framed this as, will this be AIPAC's ultimate defeat? And there's almost a kind of self-fulfilling wish when some of the media talk about this. And again, without knowing the outcome, we're still in the midst of the battle. There are still weeks ahead. There are still a number of people who have not made up their minds. But if, for argument's sake, in the end, majorities, bipartisan majorities, oppose the deal, but the president, with the need for only 1/3 plus 1 in one House, wins, I think that we can still declare a certain victory. And I don't say that glibly. One should never underestimate the power of the White House. When the White House is determined to achieve a goal, the White House has a toolbox unlike just about anyone else on the face of the earth in democratic societies. I'm not speaking about what Stalin would do. I'm talking about democratic societies. And this White House has determined that this deal will be its signature foreign policy issue. So one should not underestimate how far they are prepared to go to seek to ensure that their side wins. That's politics. I respect that. And we should not, by the way, underestimate the kind of difficulty that Democrats like Chuck Schumer and Nita Lowey faced. This was not an easy, consequence-free decision on their part, believe me. So we end up with bipartisan majorities that oppose the deal, a majority of the American people that oppose the deal, and the president showing at the end to the world that one House of Congress, or maybe both, were able to muster 1/3 plus a few votes in order to stop it. Well, I think in many respects, given the relative power of the two sides, that's not a bad outcome for those who oppose the deal. And I would not yield to those in the media who would gleefully like to say this is the end of the pro-Israel community or the end of AIPAC and organizations like AJC. Far from it. Far from it. So I don't see the sky falling. You know, by the way, some people 30 years ago predicted this after the AWACS debate. For those of you old enough to remember the AWACS debate when Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. Again, a good friend of Israel. And AIPAC went to the mat on that one. Lost in the end. Tough fight. Lost. Recovered. The pro-Israel community got stronger. And here we are. So, you know, these predictions of our demise are both premature and mostly in the minds of those who wish the demise. And we shouldn't yield to them. Have we solved the Iran problem? Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.